The honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to be able to stand up and speak on this important piece of legislation. Deputy Speaker, before I was elected, and in fact if I go all the way back to my old university days, I have always had a passion and an interest in opening up markets and advancing the cause of free and open trade. The reason is straightforward, because we know that free markets and free trade is the pathway to prosperity for every society in the past and forever will be in the future. No society has ever taxed itself into prosperity, it's never aided itself into prosperity, but it has traded itself into prosperity. And even this piece of legislation, which may not seem like the compelling overarching framework of all things we need to do to advance the cause of freer and open markets across the world, it is nonetheless yet another brick in the wall that we are trying to build, or the bridge we are trying to build, to try and increase the amount of free-flowing goods and services between our great nation and those who seek to engage with us. Free-flowing goods and services have been and always will be responsible for the wealth of this country. We have always been a nation that cannot consume everything that it produces, and that if we want to see an advancement in our material prosperity and the material prosperity of so many of the other countries that we engage with, we need more traffic on our international trade highways, not less. But to make sure that we have that advancement of free and open markets and trade, you need rules and standards which are universally understood and minimise the behind-the-border obligations and regulations which can undermine the capacity for business to get on with it, for enterprises to get on with it, for entrepreneurs seeking to build standards, to build products and goods and services that they can trade across the global marketplace to get on with it. The lesser the regulation, always the better. The more consistency between harmonisation, between standards, the better, because it removes an obstacle and a barrier, because there was one truth, Deputy Speaker, that if you have more complex regulation, like more complex tax, all it does is favour established interests as people seek to use and manipulate those regulations or taxations in their interest, and burdens the costs of those people who are merely starting out and giving their fair share and their fair go. And that's why this piece of legislation is important, because it seeks to achieve that harmonisation and remove barriers or unnecessary barriers that sit at the heart of our economy for those people who want to export. We need more competition for goods and services domestically, but more critically, we need more competition for goods and services globally, not higher restrictions on our importers and our exporters. We need to rebuild, frankly, Australia's free trade consensus. I'm sure, Deputy Speaker, like many people in this chamber, they have watched as that free trade consensus that was built after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War has become tested and challenged by countries that now seek to impose tariffs and regulations on other nations to export basic goods, value-added goods like steel. And that risks a global trade war, because what we know, when you see countries resort to protectionist measures, whether it's by simple tariffs, by quotas or regulations, is that eventually countries will respond in kind. And every person on this planet will end up paying more for less. They will have a reduced standard of living. They will see costs and obligations shifted upon them by those political masters who only seek to buy votes and advancement in the interests of their constituencies, but at the expense of the living standards and always at the greatest expense of the poor. And so anything we can do to undermine that cause and that crusade by those people who seek to use trade to their political advantage is worthy and just. And that again returns to this bill about what its potential and what its objective, even in a basic administrative reason, is. It is part of that brick of the building the bridge for an international free trade highway. And we need to rebuild that consensus for that free trade highway. If we do, the principal beneficiary is the Australian consumer. And that includes people, real people, living across this great continent who seek merely to live the highest quality of standard of care of living that's available to them. The family of four who are always looking for good deals in supermarkets and shopping centres and don't want to pay overly inflated prices, carrying the cost of tax and regulation and tariffs and other measures. Those people who are vulnerable and just trying to get ahead. The student who's starting out and making their first kick at life, living away from home, trying to live a happy, healthy lifestyle on a tight household budget. They are the victims of protectionism. Just like single-income families who are feeling the cost of living pressures firm on their shoulders as they manage the great costs in their life, not just managing whether it's rental or mortgage stress and housing stress, but the costs of energy and electricity, which, let's face it, Deputy Speaker, our political opponents are doing little to help us try and reduce those prices. But let's get past that. The burden and the cost of education, the burden and the cost of making sure people can afford basic staples and supplies to feed their family, to clothe their family. When you increase regulations and barriers, they are the costs that go up. Those that are most sensitive, those that are produced by people in other parts of the world where Australia does not have a comparative advantage, where we are not competitive and we rely on the ingenuity and the capacity of other nations. But let's face it, even if we increase those costs and they don't go straight directly to the household, they in the end become costs that are burdened by businesses in Australia who seek to be competitive in a global marketplace. At every step, at every stage, they suffer the consequences, whether it's the family of four, the student, the single-income family or the pensioner. No matter who has a tight budget, protectionism only rewards one group of people. It's the established interests and those who are rich and powerful. And that is why, as a Liberal, I will always defend a freer, more open market economy and freer and open trade, because it is the people seeking a sense of opportunity in society that we must always stand up for. And the more we empower those people who are able to export and import across boundaries and barriers, the more we empower those people to live better lives. And the more we empower importers to challenge the status quo, the more we drive competition. Too many people in trade policy are only interested in a mercantilist perspective, focusing on exports because they think that that is the only way to achieve prosperity, without recognising the importing power that drives competition in domestic economies, as Australia is a great emblem across the world for delivery. We cannot produce everything ourselves, but what we produce we do well, and we sell on the global marketplace with a premium. But when we import things, it value adds and contributes to the development of our domestic industry to be competitive across the world. We want to see cheaper prices for goods, as well as protecting consumers against misleading information about where something is made. It's about clarity and transparency so people can make those informed decisions. This bill forms part of the government's broader reform of country origin labelling. Labelling information gives consumers protection against misleading and deceptive conduct. Regulation governing these rules should be the same for imported and domestic goods. It's about harmonisation, it's about informing consumers, and it's about making sure that behind-the-border measures aren't acting as a sneaky or a tricky way to confuse not just consumers, but to add costs onto the Australian consumer. Therefore, it makes sense to ensure there is consistency between the Competition and Consumer Amendment Act and the Commerce Trade Descriptions Act. The bill would have the effect of providing a defence for importers who get caught up in the importation of goods with a false description. And the alignment between the two acts will reduce the complexity of enforcing origin marking requirements at the border, allowing the Australian Border Force to focus compliance activities on goods that don't meet the safe harbour defences. And in short, this bill gives our importers the freedom to make a claim about the origin of their goods, similar to those permitted under the Australian consumer law. This bill isn't just a brick in the bridge to advance the free trade international superhighway. It's a bill that seeks to reinforce Australia's existing commitment to free and open markets and trade, to say to the average Australian that they should pay no more than necessary for those basic consumer goods that they enjoy, and particularly for those that are most sensitive to prices and which most dramatically are consumed by average Australian households, those vulnerable and those on fixed incomes related to food. And that's the basis in which, Deputy Speaker, I support this bill.